Hello, this is Matt on the Moon Lambo channel. Ripple executive unveils XRP e-commerce platform, and we're talking about a little something that Ripple employee Craig DeWitt came up with, and he was recently interviewed by Tony on his YouTube channel, which is called Thinking Crypto, which I actually happen to have listened to, oh gosh, it's probably 2 or 3 days ago. And I've been meaning actually to talk about it in a video, and then this article popped up on this exact topic, and so I thought, yeah, okay, no more putting this off. And it was a fantastic video, by the way. If you guys haven't seen it, I encourage you to check out Tony's channel. But I've got some, well, of course, I want to share with you the specifics, but I've got some thoughts on this, and I also have perhaps a couple questions, but I'm going to cover that, and then also we're going to continue a series of critical thinking exercises that we've been engaging in over the last several days or so. There's an XRP community member, some of you already seen these videos, but his name is Martin Volk, and we've been having a fun back and forth, just trying to figure out the reality of the situation, like in terms of pressures on price action, functionally what's happening, the way on-demand liquidity is structured given the speed of XRP. And Martin is of the position that in the short term, XRP is too fast for its own good, and my position is that it is not. I don't see it, I definitely still don't see it as a downside, but we've got an update for you here, and this has been a really fun back and forth, and I appreciate Martin taking the time to share his opinion, because I encourage diversity of thought, and one of my favorite things on this channel is when I have an opportunity to have a civil back and forth with somebody on just ideas to try and get to the truth of any given matter pertaining to the XRP ecosystem. But before we go any further, if you would please delicately tap that like button. Also, if you are a fan of Ripple and XRP, gosh darn it, you just might be the coolest person on the entire planet. Go ahead and subscribe to the Moon Lambo channel, because I just gave you a compliment, and it's your time to return the favor. All right, now let's dive in. Ripple's director of product is pulling back. Oh, actually, no, I got to give a shout out here. John Luciano, thank you very much for sending this article to me. You tagged me along with a number of others in the XRP community. Much appreciated, John. All right, Ripple's director of product is pulling back the curtain on an XRP payments project called Payburner. The platform, which Craig DeWitt is building as a side project, is designed to make it extremely simple to send and receive e-commerce payments. In a new Thinking Crypto interview, DeWitt says that while working on an XRP-centered music platform, it quickly became clear that a universal one-click crypto payment system is sorely needed. Yeah, and fair enough. And by the way, so as far as X songs go, which there's a quote, and that is what he's talking about here, there isn't anything else in existence like this. And it's interesting because, other platforms where you can purchase music, it really tilts in favor of large corporations that own the rights to those music, and there's really not a great way if you're a smaller band musician to monetize your work, and he's trying to fix this here. And with other platforms, there are a whole bunch of intermediaries, and they take large cuts. That's not the case with this, though. In fact, 100% of profits actually go directly to the artist in question here. Now, here's a quote. Payburner got started because we had this idea for X songs, and then we realized that there wasn't actually a great ecosystem for individuals to do peer-to-peer payments using XRP. It was interesting to see in the initial version of X songs, the vast majority of payments were coming from digital assets. And this is interesting. Check this out. People were buying songs for 20 XRP, which was the weirdest thing. Turns out that that's the minimum withdrawal for a lot of these exchanges. Now, to be clear, and I'm sure most of you know, there's that minimum reserve of 20 XRP, and that's what he's talking about. And so you might have thought, why did he word it like this? Turns out that's the minimum withdrawal for a lot of these exchanges, but he didn't say all exchanges. Well, that's because many exchanges, for instance, and I remember this was the case back when I used Binance before Binance.us existed, so this was back in like 2017, 2018, there was a shared wallet, and my XRP and everybody else's XRP on that exchange, I mean, maybe there were a few different ones, but it's just lumped in there, and so ultimately when I wanted to take all of my XRP off the exchange, I didn't have to worry about keeping 20 XRP in reserve. I was able to take it all off because it was a shared wallet. That's where the idea ID tag comes in. That's the reason that if you don't use your ID tag, you could lose your XRP potentially forever, because the ID tag is your little address within the main address, for lack of a better term off the top of my head. So that's what it is. So, but with some exchanges, you actually do legitimately have your own wallet, in which case there's that 20 XRP reserve, which is what led to that ultimately here. So that's why people were buying songs for 20 XRP, which was the weirdest thing, as he said, quote. And then he says, and this is more of his quote, "Then it kind of dawned on us that actually there hasn't been an excellent wallet infrastructure that makes things really easy for customers of X songs to actually leverage XRP." And so literally what this is, and it is a very simple concept, on this particular platform with X songs, artists can list their stuff, and then you can buy it with XRP. It pretty much really is that simple. There's no intermediary, and you get to retain all of the profits. So really easy for individuals to understand. And I'm going to tell you in a moment what my concern is in terms of adoption here, but let me cover this a little bit further. The Ripple executive launched X Songs in December, a new digital marketplace that allows artists to sell their songs online for XRP. There's no fee to upload or post songs, and artists receive 100% of the revenue from their sales through the peer-to-peer XRP payments. DeWitt says that Payburner will launch as a Chrome extension and will also be available as a WordPress plugin, making it available to approximately 455 million websites. And here's another quote. "When you look at the distribution of websites today, you have a vast majority of websites that run on WordPress. One thing that we're really excited about is by building a plugin to WordPress, you could make it very easy for people who want to receive XRP and payment for goods to have that plugin. Then you have a built-in ecosystem of people who are easily able to purchase the goods using the Payburner plugin that they have in their browser. So the way that we're approaching this is really one of a two-sided market. One where you have sellers and one that you have buyers. We're going to go actively cultivate the ecosystem on both sides to make a better experience for both parties, which I think is awesome. So as far as the Chrome plugin and what the platform does itself, I think it's absolutely awesome, and tons of credit to Craig DeWitt. And I hope that it works out. I certainly do. It's utilizing XRP, so gosh, why wouldn't I, as an XRP holder, want that? Of course I do. And it very well may. But I have one big question that Tony didn't end up asking, that if I were asking the questions in the interview, I definitely would have posed it, and it comes from a place of genuine curiosity. Because again, part of the struggle with this all is adoption. And so as far as the Chrome plugin, that's why I said that's awesome. That will make it easier for people that have XRP. But when you're talking about the world of crypto and retail adoption, that's a struggle. And I've said on this channel before that although the idea of a peer-to-peer cash system, without a central authority is what Satoshi Nakamoto originally envisioned Bitcoin for, although that was the first proposed use case, we haven't seen that come to fruition, and not purely for technological reasons. It's because there's not a lot of friction for most people on the planet in terms of payment. We're perfectly happy using our United States dollars. Right? And it doesn't mean that it would never be adopted at some point down the road as friction increases, but today in 2020, for most people, it's just not a problem. And so that's why utilizing XRP on the back end makes a ton of sense. You don't have to have people adopt it. And by the way, the user experience, if you're going to enter the world of crypto, buying and selling, sending, it is not user-friendly today. And so the concern in the short term is, since we don't have that, although I certainly suspect we will one day, the question I essentially would have asked him is, how do you encourage adoption of the platform, given that on the retail side we have over a decade of experience, real-world circumstances indicating that mass majorities of people are not interested in buying, holding, and actually utilizing cryptocurrency? It's like, how do you do that? And maybe the answer would have been, and this comes from a place, again, of genuine curiosity, because I like what he's doing. I'm not trying to be overly critical, but I'm just, maybe the answer would have been ultimately, yeah, it's a struggle right now, but we think as infrastructure gets built out, maybe it's as simple as the user experience is going to ease up over time, and even if you couldn't put a timestamp on it, even if it's 3, 4, 5, 10 years, whatever it is, and that would have been reasonable, but I just want to see if he recognizes that as a major problem, as I certainly do. Fun stuff to think through here, and it's not that it's insurmountable and there's true utility to be had with this. I certainly do believe it'll change the way actually, here's the best way to frame it. It'll change the opportunity for artists out there. that's very meaningful. It's very hard to monetize your work today, and if this platform works as intended, that could create tremendous opportunity. And if XRP is at the heart of it in terms of the transactions, my gosh, you know what that does is supply and demand. If XRP is adopted in this sort of way, I mean, you're talking about e-commerce here, but it's more so that hurdle of how do you get them to enter the world of crypto and specifically XRP in the first place, because it is not a fun experience. It's not fun to learn, and for many people, it will not be perceived as easy. So there you go. Again, I'm not trying to be overcritical. I just think it's worth asking. On to the next topic now. From XRP community member Martin Valk, we continue this. And he ended up agreeing with me in a video I put out just the other day. I pointed out that, because he was talking about, and there's been a little bit of misunderstanding back and forth because, frankly, Twitter is not the best platform for having like a long format conversation. But we're doing our best with it. So at least I have the benefit of being able to speak here since I have this platform. But he's doing his best typing here, which I appreciate. I do. But I think what we agreed on ultimately is just, maybe there was a little bit of a misunderstanding, but I perceived him as perhaps thinking that part of the reason that he said XRP was too fast is that, when there's a transaction, there's a buyer and then there's a seller, if whoever's purchasing the XRP, they have it, but then it's so quick, it's just back into the supply, it's back into the ecosystem. And I made the point that it's actually not necessarily. Most people that are buying XRP are not immediately listing it on an exchange right away. That's the point that I made yesterday, so that's pretty well where we left off. And so as a result, it doesn't matter if it's 3 seconds or 3 days to complete a ledger transaction with XRP, it functionally doesn't matter. And so here's his response, and then I have, and then I'll share with you my response. Spoiler alert, though, I still do not believe that either in the past, present, or future XRP was, now is, or will be too fast. I still do not believe it, and I'll illustrate further why. But here's what Martin had to say here. Moon Lambo, they should call us Nereus, as we shall get to the bottom of this. And I had to Google that. I wasn't familiar with this term. But he writes, FYI, Nereus was the deep-sea robotic vehicle that successfully reached the deepest part of the world's ocean, the Mariana Trench. We are not there yet, but I can feel that we are getting closer. Yes, indeed, sir. I think so. We're finding common ground here. Although you'll see why as I go through this. I think part of our problem is, even though we functionally both understand how the system works here, we may just, the terminology we're using, our definitions, that's probably what doesn't align, which makes it seem like we're not agreeing on this one component, where functionally, in terms of understanding of how it actually works, I suspect we do agree, and we do understand. I think it's just the words that we're using. I'll illustrate and explain that in just a moment here. But he writes, quotes from your video. If you are a speculator, most people are holding on to it. Even if you are a trader, you don't just instantly throw it back in there. And this is my quote. And then here's his response here. It's my response. I completely agree. Thumbs up. And this would be covered by the long-term demand in my diagram, which is, here you go. So there's a little screen grab. Speculative investment and or store of value. An investor who purchases a speculative investment is likely focused on price fluctuations. While the risk associated with the investment is high, the investor is typically more concerned about generating a profit based on market value changes for that investment than on long-term investing. A store of value is an asset that maintains its value without depreciating. Okay, so we are on the same page on that. Then he writes, but we need to focus on the short-term demand, and I feel that this is where we misunderstand each other. In your latest, and may I say once again, exquisite video. Oh, you're making me blush. No, I'm kidding, of course. No, I know it's awesome. I mean, it's a Moon Lambo video. You ain't gonna top that, player. Then he writes, you stopped exactly where I tried to explain it. And he's got the laughy emoji. And he writes, I didn't just want to ask some questions, hashtag LOL. Fair enough. And he writes, this point is key, and I think we both agree on it. You may just not have linked the two together as of yet. And I'll tell you what, I had linked this all together. I just didn't know, I didn't know that's what you were trying to get at, basically. But yeah, no, certainly, no, what you're talking about here ultimately, and I'm going to run through it in just a moment here. No, I've known this for almost 2.5 years, just to be clear here. Then he writes, here's a quote from my video, and he writes, almost no one is buying XRP and then immediately listing it for sale again on the exchange. Then he writes, this is exactly what on-demand liquidity is. buying XRP, using it for the transaction, and then selling it immediately so that you don't have to hold it. See the step-by-step guide to on-demand liquidity added below. Okay, so a few things here. As far as the way functionally on-demand liquidity is conducted, if you will, I'm not privy to all of the specifics, but I have caught wind that part of what happens here is that there are flows more heavily in one direction, and sometimes there are rebalancings that happen, like bigger rebalancings. Rebalancings, is that a word? A bigger rebalancing of XRP at the sending destination, just to make sure that you have sufficient liquidity. And I'm not sure that that's, and I understand, like, and you even had in a screen grab in here that sometimes the sender, the account is topped off, and maybe that's also true. I'm not privy to the specifics there, so it kind of depends. As on that point, if it is the case that it's not immediately thrown back to the sending, the sending pool of liquidity, then no, it's not the case. It's not the case that all of that XRP enters the ecosystem, but it gets even more complex than that. Even if there is a topping off, it does not mean necessarily that all of that, depending on the pool of liquidity you're talking about, it does not mean necessarily that it's re-entered the ecosystem. So what you wrote there, when you wrote this is exactly what on-demand liquidity is, I don't know for sure that is true. These are things that I've just been accumulating in my mind from things that I've read over the last 2.5 years, and so I don't believe necessarily it's like that every single time. That's not to say that it couldn't be, okay? But that is different than what I thought you were talking about in the previous video. If I thought you were talking about this, I would have delved into this concept a little bit further. But absolutely, yeah, it's true. And of course, depending on the blend of price and liquidity, that determines what types of payments can flow through on-demand liquidity. So of course, I certainly understand that as well. Here's the thing, because you're still labeling this, and this is where it gets to, like, so to be clear, I think we both functionally understand how this works. I think we have more or less the same understanding of how on-demand liquidity works. So what we're talking about here is a difference, and I'm not willing to label that as a shortcoming of XRP, as in XRP being too fast, either in the past, the present, or the future. I'm not willing to concede the point that it is a problem, and you seem to want to label it as a problem, although even to this point, I'm not sure if you're saying that it's a problem in the past, the present, or the future, so I could use some clarification from you on that. I really am not specifically, I thought you wrote something previously that it was a problem today, and that's what's led the price down, which has led to some of my previous questions for you. I personally don't see that, because if that were to be a problem, if the short-term demand, as you're labeling it here, if that is functionally a shortcoming of XRP, making it harder for the price of XRP to rise, I would actually, again, ask you, well, then how much slower would XRP have to be? How much slower would the blockchain have to be for that not to be the case? And why would that be the case? So it still goes back to that question, which is kind of what I asked you the other day here. And if you think about it logically, like, continue the logical progression of let's say we had that. Let's say for this short-term demand here, as you've labeled it, let's say that there was a slower XRP blockchain. I don't care. Pick your time frame. I don't care if you want to say it's half a day or 3 days. Well, I would argue that the slower it gets, the worse effect that would have on the price of XRP, because you're not solving a fundamental problem to as meaningful a degree if you're not eliminating the friction that's in the cross-border payments today. A lot of that having to do with the speed. So if you slow it down just so that there's not XRP in circulation for the sake of it, that's a negative. That's absolutely a negative. And so if a slower XRP would be worse than a fast XRP, I don't know how it logically follows that a fast XRP is too fast for its own good and thus is hurting price. I'm still not seeing it. To me, it doesn't logically follow. And I think that we both understand how on-demand liquidity works. It seems pretty clear to me that if we don't have the exact same understanding, it's pretty gosh darn close here. And so that's why I was saying I think it comes down to what we're willing to label it. I'm not willing to label XRP being too fast as a result of what we're discussing here, and it seems as though you are. But again, my humble opinion is that it does not logically follow. I don't think that it's reasonable to label that as too fast. Now, if I'm misinterpreting you, again, please let me know. I'm doing my best in good faith here to say what I think I'm picking up from what you're putting down here. But let me know what you think on this, because this is a fun conversation. If we haven't gotten to the bottom of it, I am happy to continue it. It's fun to think through all this stuff here. But is XRP too fast for its own good? Moon Lambo still says No, and it's not hurting price. It's good for price. If it weren't this fast, people would not have as much confidence in it. I tell you what, if XRP was as slow as Bitcoin, I wouldn't even be holding it, and I wouldn't have ever started this channel. So that's just to illustrate the point that a slower XRP would be worse for price. I firmly believe that. Okay, but everybody listening here, you can also tell me what you think below. Do I have it right? Do I have it wrong? Am I missing something? Just let me know. I think the conversation's a whole lot of fun. But that is it for this video. I am not a financial advisor. Do not buy or sell anything because of anything that I say or write. That would be a very, very, very bad idea. Until next time, to the moon, Lambo.